Hi, my name is Brittany King, and I serve as the Senior Marketing Associate for the National Benevolent Association. I'm so excited to introduce this video series to you. I sat down with Dr. Norma Ellington Twitty and Reverend Monica Wedlock Kilpatrick for a dynamic conversation about NBA's history, equity and inclusion, leadership, and the importance of NBA's work both inside and outside the walls of the church. This video also marks a bit of a passing of the torch moment. In 1985, Dr. Twitty became the first Black woman to serve in a leadership role at NBA. She was the VP of Program Planning and Evaluation. Monica and Norma get into this more during their discussion, but Norma's time at NBA opened the door for other women of color to see themselves working at NBA as well, including Reverend Kilpatrick, who joined NBA in 2015 and now serves as the VP of Organizational and Leadership Development. I am so excited for you all to watch and hear this conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Monica Wedlock Kilpatrick, and I serve as the Vice President of Organizational and Leadership Development at NBA. I started with NBA in 2015 as Director of the Disciples Care Network and Affinity Group. And I reside in just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in Conyers, Georgia.
I am Dr. Norma Ellington Twitty, and I served as Vice President of Program Planning and Evaluation for the National Benevolent Association. I was privileged to work for NBA from 1985 to 2000. I retired in 2007 from a federally funded project called the Green Book Initiative. It was one of 5 demonstration projects geared to get better outcomes for victims of domestic violence and their families as they interfaced with the court system and child welfare. So at the end of my career, I actually had 2 jobs that involved institutional change, which is very unusual. There aren't a whole lot of people going around looking to be involved in institutional change. But I was privileged, certainly on the faith-based side, to work for NBA and then to do the federal project. In my retirement, I feel very blessed and have had a very fulfilling life. I will just share briefly that I serve as board president for the Hilton Point Apartments 2, which is a HUD, Housing Urban Development Senior Living Facility, that was applied for when I was vice president of NBA in the 1990s. It represented a partnership of NBA for the first time with a minority congregation. And we actually got 3 HUD facilities out of that partnership: Centennial Plaza, Hilton Point Apartments, and Hilton Point Apartments 2, for which I serve as board president. So life comes full circle, which is kind of interesting. I also serve as president of the Old Timers Grapevine, a newsletter directed to denomination retirees that was founded by my pastor, my childhood pastor, Reverend William K. Fox. And we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and we keep retirees connected to one another and to what's going on in the church. My greatest joy since retirement, though, is being gran for 10-year-old Journey and 12-year-old Zion Strickland.
Awesome. Thank you all both for that. Monica, we're going to start with you. Can you share what made you say yes to NBA in 2015? And also why you said yes to this new position that you took towards the end of 2020?
Absolutely. So why did I say yes to NBA? Well, prior to NBA, I served as a director of admissions and recruitment for a seminary. And while I was there, I really noticed there was a growing chasm between the stories of prospective students that I heard on a regular basis as they sat in my office or as I traveled to different places to get to know them. Their visions, their hopes, their passion for what the church was, and the landscape of the church across denominations, which had begun to paint a picture of a growing decline and a grim future for the church, right? We all know that story. And so on one hand, yes, it's true. The statistics were showing declines and in mainline churches. Yet on the other hand, every day I heard stories of young people, middle-aged people, older people coming back to seminary with a vision and a hope for the church that just didn't neither of those made sense to me, how we were going to bridge those gaps. Additionally, as a person of color, and in particular as a Black woman in this role in a still predominantly white institution at the time, meant that another set of leaders could now see themselves in an institution they had never seen themselves before. We all know when you can see yourself, you can imagine yourself being there. And in that role, in that position, I played that role. I was very clear about that role. But what I also knew was that the coloring or the diversifying of the student body was not always a welcome reality, because we come with different ways of thinking. We come with different experiences, different ways of seeing the church, right? And so at some point, the questions I had to answer from others across the campus or those who were in charge created a less welcoming shift for me. It didn't feel welcoming anymore. It didn't feel the energy that I had for the work felt really hard as a Black woman, and having to kind of define and defend every day why these are also God's chosen in this place. Those young adults, those middle-aged, those older folks were also seeing the church in a different way. The seminary I was at was they were very clear about creating pastors for congregations, which is certainly important. I love the church. It was important. And yet the folks that were coming in my office were seeing such a broader way of thinking about what church is and what are the ministries of the church and what did it mean to be even ordained clergy in the church and serve their communities. So it got tiring. We all know that burnt out feeling. It got tiring trying to figure that out. So when I learned about the MBA, through actually the job posting, as I mentioned, of the Director of Disciples Care Network and Affinity Groups, I felt affirmed in my experiences and what I had been discerning in my heart, that there was indeed another way, and perhaps many other ways to understand what the church is and what the church could be, right? And so I was learning about this network of ministries of care, historic, and yet those that were beginning to emerge. And that diversity of leaders answering those calls beyond the traditional four walls of the church was exciting to me. Like I said, don't get me wrong, I love the church, but I wanted to see the church in new ways and to be a part of those who were growing the church in new ways. And so that's why I said yes to MBA. Saying yes to this position, I think we're in a new space and in a new day. Our team has even changed from when I began. And I wanted to be able to support the new ideas of the program team that we have now that are growing, that I feel the passion of what I had back in those days. And how do I continue to walk alongside, to coach, to encourage those with visions and dreams and hopes and wanting to plan that out and support the work of the church. And so that's what I see my role is now, to get the best, to try and get the best out of our team for the sake of the ministries, for the sake of the people who are being served in our communities, for God's people.
Yeah, I love that theme of like, that seems to come up a lot in NBA's work. Like we are church, we are doing church work, and it's just necessarily, it's outside inside and outside of
Right.
church walls. And so I love that merging of, you know, what you did before and what you're doing now. It's really awesome.
And I will say, I'm sorry, Brittany, I was going to just add that it's also the reminder that these ministries began out of church.
Yes.
Right? Many of these ministries that we serve now began because congregations had a vision for the more. And so that connection, again, is so important to me, that the congregation and many of these nonprofit ministries can't live without one another. We need each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
For sure.
Norma, can you walk us through your time at NBA? You already shared when you began working for the organization in 1985, but why did you say yes at that time?
Well, as I thought about this, I really wanted to go further back than when I said yes, to leading up to why I said yes. I grew up in Centennial Christian Church with William K. Fox as my pastor back in the 50s. And you talk about church and ministry. I knew nothing about NBA. Now, St. Louis Christian Home was in St. Louis. I guess that's why it was called St. Louis Christian Home, the first NBA facility. And it was in a neighborhood where one of my friends lived. And I used to go by the Christian home many times. But one day, for whatever reason, I noticed the sign on the gate and I saw our denomination cross. I said, oh, they must be connected to the Christian church. But the visual image that I had was of a whole lot of white children playing in the yard. And it was like, it's the church. I don't see myself represented. It was momentary. I didn't think of that. I never talked to anyone about it, but it stayed in my mind. Now, fast forward to 1979, and again, my childhood pastor, Reverend K. Fox, is the administrative secretary of the National Convocation. I had just received my PhD from the University of Michigan, and I thought he was calling to congratulate me. Well, that wasn't why he called me. He was calling me because he wanted me to serve on an NBA convocation task force. He described to me that in the 50s, NBA had raised money for a Black home for children and a Black home for older adults. And of course, the conversation said, we don't want that. We want to go to we want to integrate the facilities you already have. So this money just sat there until the 70s when Bill Gibble wanted to give it to the convocation to spend. But Reverend Fox was very strategic. He used the money to get his foot in the door of the NBA with this task force. I served on the task force and a number of others from around the country. And out of that yes to the task force, and initially I told Reverend Fox, I can't do this. I mean, and each time I gave an excuse, he said, but sister, we need you. And finally, I said yes to get off the phone because I knew that I couldn't say no to Reverend Fox. And I thought of that image of St. Louis Christian Home when I was a teenager. And I said, things haven't changed since the 50s, but maybe if I get involved, things can change. And that made me say yes to the task force. And the yes to the task force led to a yes to serving on the NBA board. And a yes to the NBA board led to saying yes to being vice president for program planning and evaluation for the National Benevolent Association. And I knew about the position because as a board member, I was part of the organizational structural study that led to that position and the other positions. So I knew exactly what I was getting into, never had seen myself as in that position. And yet my background as a psychologist uniquely qualified me for the position, especially relative to program quality and other kinds of program development. And as a child, I had never dreamed that I could work for the church as a psychologist. So it was almost like, well, I'm sure it was God that said, you can now combine your faith background and your professional expertise to serve people. And I knew how impactful MBA was.
Yeah, it's very like serendipitous in a way. Like you said, it was God. It's similar to what Monica was saying. Like if we as Black women, as Black people can't see it, then how do we know that we ourselves can be it? And so, I mean, I know that I'm thankful for both of you for saying yes, because seeing those faces made it easier for me to say yes to working at MBA as well.